Greetings, everyone. Hello, and welcome, as Caitlin said, to the 21st installment of TRG 30, our virtual roundtable series. I'm joined today by my colleague, David Brownlee, who is the Director of International Strategy with TRG, and my name is Jim DeGood, the Vice President of North America. Together today, we are on a journey to share with you the results of a deep dive into my favorite topic, David, some data. Just after the COVID-19 pandemic hit our industry, we launched, in partnership with Purple 7, an international benchmark dashboard that has enabled us to aggregate patron transactional data in both the ticket sales and the contributed revenue side of businesses, and to track those behavioral trends to report on what this pandemic is having, the impact this pandemic is having on the field, as well as what recovery is starting to look like. More than 400 organizations in North America and the UK are participating in the dashboard, and it is free for anyone to participate. Today in the session, David is going to share with us some insights into the contributed revenue side of this benchmark. And in today's data, we'll be looking at aggregated data across more than 100 participating organizations in North America and the UK. This is the second release of an ongoing series of releases of research reports that we will be issuing out of the International Benchmark Dashboard. Participants in the dashboard have the ability not just to see aggregated views of the data, but also to compare their results against more smaller and thoughtfully curated benchmark groups. So we're going to share a lot of data points today in true TRG style, but we know that what you value more than data points are action, inspirations for action coming out of those data points. And David and I want to make sure that we reserve a lot of time for your questions around action at the end. So again, as Caitlin said, use the Q&A feature to submit those questions. We're going to start today with our first poll. As Caitlin said, we are polling you today in ways that are new and different. And so the first poll we want to set this conversation in some data is, how are you faring right now in 2020 with contributed revenue compared to the same time last year in 2019? And David, as those responses come in, I wonder if you would share a couple of top-line findings from the benchmark with us.
Thanks, Jim, certainly. I think to kick off, let's look at North America and the UK and some of the differences between North America and the UK. Because of the 105 odd organisations in this study, about a third are UK, 2/3 in North America, but with very different traditions in terms of fundraising versus ticketed income. What we found for 2019 out of the cohort for North America, every dollar generated in ticketed income was matched by $1.19 in giving income. So for this cohort, actually giving is more important than ticket sales in terms of their overall revenue. For the UK, every pound in ticket sales was matched by just 9 pence in donated income. Tiny, tiny proportion compared to the two. And I think this explains one of the reasons why UK organisations are finding things so tough at the moment, that earned income is so important for them and it's just being turned off. Today, we're going to go through in some detail some of the figures that we've found from this analysis. But the reason for doing this was back at the beginning of the pandemic and the closure periods, we were hearing a lot that organisations were seeing a boost in terms of their philanthropic revenue. And a large part of that was about tickets that, instead of being refunded, were being turned into donations. So our question for this was, okay, now that we have seen ticket sales fall off a cliff, are we seeing a growth in philanthropic revenues to replace that? And sadly, what we have to say in terms of this initial analysis is no, that's not been the case. In North America, actually it's been very, very similar, just a 2% drop overall in terms of revenues from gifts in the first 6 months of the year. So we're looking at a comparison between beginning of January and end of June for 2019 versus 2020. And in North America, 2020 is down 2%. In the UK, it's down a bit more. It's down 12%.
You know, David, as I share the results from the poll that we just launched, what you've just described is in fact what a majority of the participants today are experiencing. And so as we move through some of the deeper cuts of the data that you've explored, it'll be interesting to consider those organizations that are ahead versus those that are in the majority reporting behind here.
Absolutely, Jim, and absolutely fascinating to see there that although, yeah, half of the organisations with us today are saying that they're behind, quarter is saying that they're ahead of where they were. And this variety of responses absolutely is what we're seeing in the data. First thing we're going to look at is for North America, and looking at the size of the overall pot of giving, first of all in 2019 and then in 2020, split down into size of gifts. And essentially what we've done is say, take out the gifts of more than $100,000 and report on those separately. And in 2019, out of that whole pot of philanthropic income, those big gifts accounted for just about a third, 36%. In 2020, it's shot up to almost a half, but up to 46% is coming up from those really big gifts. And when we dug a bit deeper in the data and looked at, okay, the top 20 gifts across the entire cohort from North America, we added all of those up in 2019, it came to $27 million. When we added them all up for 2020, it came to $47 million. So what we're seeing here is a huge growth in big gifts from people who really care about our cultural organizations. And in terms of that 2% drop, that small drop for North America in terms of philanthropic income, it would be far higher than that if it hadn't been for those really big gifts. We have a segmentation scheme based on levels of loyalty that we work with on Purple 7. And our two most loyal forms of customers are what we call active and super active customers. And generally, they only form between about 10 and at most 20% of any database. In North America in 2020, we found that actually the amount of revenues coming from these super loyalists was actually down, 11% down, $7.1 million across that 6-month period. Concerning, but still needs to be in the context that they represent, this small group represents 60% of overall giving. So to summarize, North America down 2% in terms of the overall size, but far more dependent on those really, really big gifts. And at the same time, maybe somewhat surprisingly, despite the fact that we're down and we've got those big gifts, the number of gifts as a whole is up by over 20%, which means that we're in a position where more people are actually giving, but they're giving less. And in a time like no other, when the cultural sector has needed their support. What do you make of it?
Yeah, more people giving less, David. On the one hand, it's great. We have more people contributing to our organizations, but in the whole, in the aggregate, the amount of contributed revenue is less than we experienced in 2019. So one of the observations that we've had in working with clients is that during this pandemic, cash is king, and we have been laser focused on cash position. And so really the only metrics that we've been hearing clients focus on are the revenue metrics. How much money do we have to operate with? How much fuel do we have in the tank? And what we would challenge the field to consider is we are people creating art for people in our community. And so we must add our focus at the household level, track people engaging in activities with you, not just the revenue from those people. And in doing so, it allows you to adapt your campaigns in such a way that you can capture or recapture dormant or lapsed donors, as well as begin to cultivate this newly formed cohort of donors that we've seen in the data giving perhaps for the first time.
Thanks, Jim. So on to the UK now. And this is the way that the pie was made up in 2019 for the UK. £80,000 is roughly $100,000. So we're comparing pretty much like for like here. And in the UK, that pot of big gifts was really, really significant, 68%, over 2/3. In 2020, the overall pie has shrunk by 12% in size. And the proportion of that is those big gifts has gone down as well. It's gone down to 65%, not a huge drop, but a little bit of a drop. In the UK, when we look at those two most engaged segments of our customer base, our patron base, for both actives and super actives, the proportion that they are giving is going up. They are really engaged in an increased way, up 21% in terms of the amount of income, or £160,000. And that's in the context of an overall fall of 12% in terms of that overall pie. And then in terms of the proportion of gift revenue, over 2/3 now is coming from just these two small segments of the most loyal customers within the UK. Our UK sum rate, to remind us, 12% drop in terms of the overall pot of gifts, but our loyal patrons are giving more. But another thing that we found, and it may sound surprising, but if UK colleagues are listening to this, they'll probably realize that it's not that surprising that we've seen a big drop in the number of gifts in the UK. And that's because in terms of where we're at, in terms of giving in the UK, for many organizations, the majority of their gifts come from top-ups when people are purchasing tickets. It's a rounding up or a small donation when you're buying tickets. And people are not buying tickets now. So it's really not surprising that we're in a position that they aren't having the opportunity to give. But that leaves us in a difficult position because we've got fewer people giving, which means that we're not covering the lost revenue, that 12%, even with that rise from our loyalists. Any thoughts on that, Jim, in terms of what we should be thinking over in the UK?
Well, it's really intriguing, David, that in each of the two regions, we're seeing very different trends in terms of revenue and in terms of people engagement. But again, I think the story is about people here and the ability, as you were saying, to create a larger piece of the revenue pie from philanthropy. And to your point, right now, we've lost the primary way that we have of developing philanthropic relationships with patrons. But like the inspiring team at Opera North, we must, you know this, we must find new channels to connect and to develop the philanthropic muscle memory of our patrons to continue to support the work of your organization outside of those traditional giving channels. This is another place where, in addition to borrowing from Opera North, you could also borrow best practices from your North American colleagues that establish standalone giving campaigns that enable you to grow the slice of that revenue pie, David.
Thanks, Jim. So last slide from me, just to sum up. Even though there's no art going on our stages, people are still giving, which is wonderful and great and fantastic, but we are not seeing that replacement of ticketing revenue through gifts. We are seeing maybe a one-off, let's hope it's a one-off, new source of revenue from tickets that are being turned into donations. But we need to ensure that this is not a one-off in terms of giving from those people. What are we now doing meaningfully in terms of using this crisis at the start of a lifetime of giving to organizations? In North America, those angels have just been incredible, and we would not be seeing the market hold up in the way that we have done without those really big givers. And in the UK, it's challenging, not because of the lack of big givers, but because in some ways the lack of small givers, because that we're not adding to those box office ticket sales as we go. And then as we dug into the data and looked further, we found that the stories are really, really different. And going back to that first poll you did today, Jim, I'm not surprised at all. In the UK, we're seeing that half of organisations are doing better than last year, half are doing worse. But some of them are doing phenomenally. One organisation is taking 16 times as much in gifts this year as it has last year. Now that's coming from a small base, but really we can see that organisations, when they're focused, can make a real difference. But overall, as a sector, both in the North America and in the UK, we're down. And do we need to be?
A major theme in what you've just shared, David, is the role of angel givers or major contributions, whether it is in the UK or in North America. And so we'd like to launch another poll. So get your poll fingers ready. We are curious to learn, outside of major giving, if you put major giving over here, what is the second largest driver of your 2020 contributed revenue results to date? So while that poll is launching, we will go ahead and share with you a couple of best practices that we know any organization, regardless of the size of staff or the orientation toward relaunching your upcoming season, can dig into. The first is ask. The biggest thing that we have seen clients and non-clients do during this time of uncertainty is to pull back on the frequency of their contributed revenue asks because of all of the other performance-related communications that have needed to occur. Don't do that. Increase the frequency of your communication, but do so strategically in a segmented way and monitor those campaign results to understand whether you need to increase or pull back that frequency and how you need to continue to tailor those messages. Secondly, this is a time to lean even further into the loyal segments that you already have. Renewals and upgrades will make a big mark in your contributed revenue results right now, especially with opportunities that you have to create new value through the creative endeavors that you have taken through this period of time to continue to connect with your supporters in the community. Ensure that you are always asking for support. We have delighted at TRG to see the content that you have all put out into the communities to celebrate and continue to share the art that you're producing and presenting. And we're also shocked to see how very few of those pieces of content are asking to support you in the organization. The last thing is something that we are doing ourselves, which is to challenge your own definition of a donor. There are different loyalty paths emerging during this time period because there are different paths of engagement. And whereas once before a top-up donor may not have made it on our annual fund radars to renew and to cultivate, in fact, in this time period, it's really important to do so. There's an opportunity here for us to grow the donor base if we begin to cultivate them. Are there plans to cultivate those top-up donors as we move into another fiscal year, another cycle of campaign giving? Let's make sure that you do have that opportunity. All right, the poll's closed. And as we pivot into taking your questions, I'll share those results with you. I don't think it's a surprise, David, that a majority of the participants today say that the philanthropic support is coming through special campaigns, and that donated tickets and traditional annual fund or membership campaigns are almost neck and neck there. Are you surprised by that poll data, David?
I'm not hugely surprised. And when we looked in to some of the campaigns and some of the overperformers, particularly within the North American cohorts, the ones that seem to be doing really well are the ones where they're getting match gifts from a trust or foundation to double the value of the gifts from their individuals. So absolutely can see why that's a focus, and it seems to be effective.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to stop sharing the poll results. When I do that, you have the power to close that poll results window so that you can see our colleague Caitlin's face as she poses questions to us from you. Caitlin, what are you hearing from participants today?
Ooh, mute, Caitlin.
Did it. I muted like I've never been on Zoom before, gentlemen. It's where I live. I'm sorry. Okay, I have a series of questions for you, David, to help characterize and just give a little bit of nuance to what's in this data and what isn't. So Emily is in the UK and is asking, does that include government subsidies? Are these donated tickets? What's in it? What's not? What do we know?
Okay, so what we know is what's in the CRM of the organizations who are taking part within this. If within your organization you treat a grant from a government as being a gift from an individual, it will appear. But I think that's not the case for the vast majority of organizations. And what we feel confident on is that while some things may be in a gray area, like particular family trusts, some organizations might consider those to be a philanthropic gift, some might put them somewhere else in terms of contributed income. We think they will treat them in the same way across both years. Therefore, comparing like with like is a sensible way to go.
Great, helpful. A question from Catherine in Canada, wondering, is there enough Canadian data to be able to pull out a separate benchmark here so we can see some nuance in North America?
Oh, that is a great question. There could be, absolutely there could be. And the number of Canadian feeds is growing at least on a weekly basis. And we are getting more and more technology to allow us to plug into Canadian companies. But if you know organizations who could be part of this, do encourage them, because as soon as we get up to about 40 or 50 Canadian organizations, absolutely we'll launch a Canadian benchmark. And we are just in the process of launching a benchmark for the Republic of Ireland as well. So if there are any colleagues there from the Republic of Ireland, please do encourage people to come and join us too.
Good, great. I have one more question here, and Jim, then it's your turn. I'm going deep into data with David here. Can you remind us what some of these terms means? We're talking about loyalists and super actives and actives. What are the parameters around those segment types?
Yeah, so our actives and our super actives have got to have attended or given within the last 18 months. Our actives have got to have a history of at least 3 engagements with our organization. Our super actives, at least 10 engagements with our organizations. So they really are our super fans.
Great. Okay, Jim, I'm turning to you with some very specific council related questions. The first from Jim. Jim has said, we have sent out a COVID appeal letter and are getting really good revenue results. What is the appropriate follow-up to those who didn't respond? Do we do an email, a postcard, another letter, different message? What's the next best step here?
Well, Jim, first of all, great name. I would say, first of all, congratulations for launching an appeal. You know, many of the non-clients that we have been engaged with have pulled back on that. So congratulations on doing that. And one of the points that you saw in a previous slide is that we recommend frequency. So absolutely a follow-up touch with the non-responders is what we would recommend. What you might consider is reporting on the success of the first wave of that campaign. You know, what is true is that patrons like to support organizations that they perceive to be successful. And so if you were to say, Caitlin, we had such outstanding response from the first wave of appeals that we raised $25,000. Don't know the scope, making it up. And we would love to add your participation and your contribution to the success here. And when you do that, when you make that investment with us, here's the great outcome that you are investing in. So I would both tie it to the success of the previous wave. I wouldn't be shy about going out and following up with non-responders, but also I would try to tie it to the investment of why that patron should consider an investment in your institution when they haven't before.
Great, thanks. Jim, another one for you. This is an anonymous question that's come in about how to manage an appeal, a philanthropic appeal against communications about a canceled season and subscriptions. How do we do all of this at once? What's the segmentation? What's the strategy? What's the priority?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, right? Like, let's just acknowledge that we are trying to convey a lot of information to the people who care about us the most in the community. You know, in having a relationship with us, they've already said we care about you in ways that cold prospects who are not engaged with you have not. And so what I would consider is a relational approach. I might consider segmenting subscribers who are donors independently from subscribers who are not. Single ticket buyers who have some kind of philanthropic history from those single ticket buyers who are not. And then you can tailor and nuance the message. You can time it differently. So if David, my colleague David, is a subscriber and a donor, I could probably talk with David about all of the options that I need him to consider at one time, because he's used to hearing all of those messages from me. Whereas if someone else is only a subscriber and has no philanthropic history, I would first pace the communication to deal with the behavior around the performances, and then I would follow up and make sure that I've got a kind of a triggered and targeted follow-up to say, now that you have close the loop on the performance communication, let's make sure that your engagement continues and that you can help us invest in a return. And then similarly with single ticket buyers. So I would just meet the patron where they are, but I would bring in a holistic view of that relationship and try to tailor the communications appropriately.
Okay, I have maybe some messaging or strategy question here. This is another anonymous one. You're both welcome to answer this here. But what would you suggest for how we should mention how important it is to give to the arts right now, especially when a lot of our conversations right now are just about refunds or dealing with ticket structures? What's the right language?
David, you want to kick us off?
Again, I'm with Jim in terms of the segmented approach to this, and we need to use different language with different people depending on what their relations are to us and how they've engaged with us and what is their motivation, if we can look at that as well. For some of our customers, they absolutely get the importance of what we're doing and we're really vital to their lives. But for others, we need to be really clear about the value that we're bringing to communities. And we're certainly not just talking about saving our institutions for the sake of our institutions. It's about the impact we have on society. So absolutely getting your data right, getting your messaging right, and getting that right to the right people.
Okay, I have one. Oh no, I'm cutting you off, Jim, because I have one last question. So last question. This is from Duncan, and I don't know that we have this in the data, so I'm going to ask you both to pull from your experiences here in talking to clients and being in the field. Are we seeing that COVID campaigns are improving or deteriorating over time? How long can we use COVID to support our fundraising strategy?
Can I go first on that? Say that what we've seen in May and June, in those gifts of less than $100,000 or $100,000 and less in North America, there is a growing gap between 2020 and 2019. So absolutely, I think what we're seeing at the moment is, yeah, it's becoming less impactful, or the sector is becoming less impactful. So maybe something new needs to be happening rather than just doing what we've been doing, because we're seeing a gap growing.
You know, what I would say is that in this time period of life, there are so many challenges that seem bigger than me and bigger than the impact that I could have. And while it's true that the community support of our institutions is dire, it's required for us to survive, that's not the posture that we should take with our community. So back to the very first TRG 30, check our posture, keep it positive. To David's point, talk about the impact that we have on the community, but also I would make it really stupid simple to say, Jim, when you contribute a gift of X dollars, this is the impact that you have on this institution today, and this is the impact that investment will have when we're able to return to operations in the future. Bring it down to the super personal level, because what's true is that every one of your patrons is encountering big decisions, and saving your organization is too big for them. But if they can see the impact that they can have in helping you take a step toward resiliency, I think that you're going to see response rates go up. Okay. All right. I'm going to take the mic, Caitlin, now. Thank you for those questions. I think what Caitlin would say is that we're sorry we didn't get to answer all of your questions, and that we absolutely will follow up with those of you who've posed questions that we didn't answer afterward. As we wrap up this session of TRG 30, one more opportunity to say, if you haven't signed up for the COVID benchmark, please do so. You can do so at trgartsresiliency.com. As David said, we are adding the ability to connect with additional CRMs on a weekly basis. So if previously you thought that you were not able to connect your data, check with us again, or we'll be in touch with you, and ask all of your colleagues in market to join as well. As we think about what's coming up in future TRG 30s, we've extended this series now through the end of September. So you may need to re-register if you haven't done that, and know that there's some really inspiring content on the horizon here. High-level provocations about coming back stronger and better and thriving through it. Caitlin is very excited about the next few, maybe even more so than she was about this time today. Finally, you know we care about your feedback. And so I want to inspire all of you as we depart this time, before you leave, to give us your feedback. We will leave this poll open as you leave. And know again that always you can see previous TRG 30 sessions at trgartsresiliency.com. That's also where you can sign up for the COVID benchmark. David, Caitlin, thank you for joining today and sharing this data. And thank you to you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.